Industry revenues are down by 20% in real terms. Mobile volumes are up fourfold.
The government wants the UK to be a leader in 5G and particularly growth. But how can we reconcile that with an industry which is in a very challenging time? We are currently sort of falling behind in league tables. Welcome to Policy Unplugged, the podcast that talks all things policy in the mobile industry. This is the inaugural episode, and I'm really excited today to have with us Karen Egan, Managing Director of Enders Analysis. And Karen, do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Yes, so I lead telecoms for Enders Analysis. Enders Analysis is a boutique research firm for telecommunications, media and technology industries. We offer a subscription research service, market intelligence, advisory services across the full range of commercial issues, regulatory and policy issues.
So in light of that, you've released a new report, which is called UK Mobile, Escape the Value Trap. So do you want to give us a quick synopsis of that report, and then we'll dive into some questions?
Yeah, so we really thought it was a good time to kind of have another look at the industry. We wrote a lot about it when Vodafone 3 were trying to gain approval for their merger. Now, a year after they have gained approval, and given the kind of the mobile market review that DCIT have initiated, we thought it was a really good time to kind of have a look at where the industry is headed, have a look at the government's objectives for the industry, and see whether the two are going to marry.
And the mobile market review, which you mentioned, it acknowledges that there are issues with the industry. And if we're looking at some of those issues, the government wants the UK to be a leader in 5G and particularly growth. But how can we reconcile that with an industry which is in a very challenging time? Its revenues are flat or declining, yet that sort of investment it needs to build out 5G and 5G standalone is huge.
Yeah, that's exactly the issue that we've had a close look at, and you're absolutely right that the industry revenues are down by 20% in real terms over the past 5 years. During that time, mobile volumes are up fourfold, and returns in the industry, the cash generated by the industry, is down by a third. So it's a real mismatch between the ability of the industry to invest in better quality networks and what the government really wants from them in terms of more resilience, better coverage. And so we looked at levers that can potentially be pulled in order to kind of get those two things closer together.
Yeah. And I suppose the sad truth is that we are currently sort of falling behind in league tables compared to our sort of nearest competitors. I think you said in a country like Switzerland lead with outstanding scores of 977, while the UK only achieved a good classification of 824. So this is impacting on, as you say, the sort of the quality of the networks we are producing. But obviously we are in that investment cycle, but we want to continue that investment cycle. We want to get 5G standalone out as quickly as possible. The current projections are to have 90% to all populated areas by 2030. But in that being an issue, it seems to be that both the sort of press and the narrative really focus on pricing, and particularly the UK's regulator has been relatively successful in sort of dropping those prices.
Yes, possibly almost to a fault. The prices really are incredibly low. I think kind of one of the biggest drivers of that, I think, is the mobile virtual network operators, the MVNOs, who piggyback on the networks of the operators themselves. They have been going from strength to strength over the last few years because of greater distribution. They've been able to extract really great wholesale rates from the operators because the operators have been under so much financial pressure, and they've had more capacity. They've also taken advantage of the in-contract price increases of the operators, and they are driving prices down to incredibly low levels and putting huge pressure on the operators. And of course, with the approval for the Vodafone 3 merger, now the operators, Vodafone 3 is under an obligation to have a reference offer, which will keep the rates for the MVNOs low for the next 5 years. And then the MVNOs who've had deals previously with Vodafone and with Three are allowed to roll over those deals on the same terms that they previously had, allowing some of them to kind of get the kind of really great network quality that we're expecting from Vodafone 3 at the kind of prices that they were able to extract from Three at a time when its network perception was really not very strong.
And so the competition is fierce. And yet, again, that sort of perception of the industry, I think, again, looking at your reports, 1.4%, or it accounts for 1.4% of household bills. And yet the first almost action of the minister currently was to attack in-contract price rises at a time when we're trying to, find that investability to invest in these networks. And yet, again, I think, what I found interesting was you looked at sort of consumer sentiments and yet there seems to be a mismatch with sort of consumers happy with where they are and the level of their bills, yet a sort of political and media situation which counts the others. Yet if you balance that out with, let's say, the utilities, which I think many people think telecoms is a utility, it's a different aspect.
That's a really interesting point you bring out. There is this perception, I think, because of kind of high headline in-contract price increases, that the mobile industry has been doing super well during that period of high inflation and carries on doing so. The problem is that those kind of in-contract price increases, they're just temporary in nature. So you might start off at kind of, say, a £10 price level. Your price goes up during the life of your contract. It kind of maybe you end the contract at £12, something like that. But then as soon as your contract ends, and this become much easier for people to do with text to switch and out of contract notifications, they go back down to that kind of new customer pricing of £10 and start there again. So it only benefits the operator and they only get more revenue and the consumers only pay more if you're always increasing the level of in-contract price increase. If you're applying the same one every year, nothing changes. So the reality is that actually telecoms prices and revenues have been trailing inflation very significantly over the past several years. And interestingly, the ONS numbers are incorrect on that. And I wonder if kind of the ONS numbers, which suggested that they kept in line with inflation, have triggered some of the response from the ministers to try to push back on the in-contract price increases. So the reality is quite different to the ONS numbers. And I understand that they are being looked at again. And when you look at the other utilities, they're up, I think, kind of some of them by more than 50% higher than inflation over that same period. So they have been actually doing phenomenally well. And it's actually telecoms is the one that has been doing least well over that time and accounts for a really small proportion of as you say, of people's spend.
Well, it said in your report, 66% price increases. Yet, based on the belief that they need investment and that those increases should happen. Yet, we're in an industry which equally needs investment. Yet the push is to get prices further down. And as you mentioned, there are mechanisms such as switch to text, which make it even easier to switch. And as you say, that temporary point of reducing your contract price anyway. So your report, sort of having taken this into account, says that we need radical change, and it offers a number of solutions. What are the solutions that you looked at in the report?
The main one, I think, that kind of is most likely, I think, to be easiest to kind of get approval for is a relaxation of the net neutrality rules. So net neutrality rules in the UK now, they are more advanced than Europe, but they are much less advanced than many other countries, particularly kind of in Asia, for example. And they are to do with kind of that the operators, they have to treat all traffic equally unless kind of there's an extreme traffic incident on their network. They can't kind of provide kind of priority lanes for any kind of particular services unless they kind of treat them as specialist services that would really benefit from this superior level of service. And if they do so, they have to treat all traffic from that category of services in the same way. Now, that's quite restrictive for the operators because it means that it's very difficult for them to, for example, sell to customers, here's a Netflix subscription with this bundle, and you get priority access on the network for watching Netflix. That would be banned under the current rules. And that's something that's quite appealing to consumers, I think. And what they would have to do instead is to say, you can have priority access for video streaming, and only if they could get the regulator to agree that this video streaming would benefit from this superior service, this superior kind of traffic levels. So it's quite, issues are kind of like positioning with consumers, and also it's quite a burdensome process for the operators to get approval. And it's a particular problem because it stifles innovation. And really the way that you really want to encourage innovation is you as a network, you set up a facility for a superior level of service, prioritization of traffic that certain services could maybe benefit from. And then you allow companies who provide those kind of services to come up with where they think demand is. And they come up with kind of particular bundles, and they come up with particular kind of innovations where they think they can use that superior service. Instead, the operators have to define what they think will be of interest, a commercial success. Then they have to get approval from the regulator, and they have to ask permission. They have to have already invested a certain amount of money, of course, in the whole concept. And that is absolutely not the way to kind of encourage innovation.
Well, the knock-on effect, Karen, is that, if you're trying to invest in one of these services that have come up, you can't be sure that service will then be quashed by the regulator. So it impedes investment.
It impedes innovation for sure. And I think it also impedes the operator's inclination to invest in improved network quality if they don't have a mechanism for charging for that superior network quality. And net neutrality does prohibit them from doing that.
And just to bring this into sort of to listeners, is this something in other industries that equally is not allowed? Because the way I think of this is, in airlines you have business class and you have premium economy and economy. In railways you have off peak and peak. Yet this is something that isn't. We have to seek permission and work out with the regulator in telecom. So it seems in contrast to other industries.
Yeah, it really is. And, so for so many industries, kind of being able to target every kind of slice of the consumer segments with what they're willing to pay for is such an important part of their commercial success. So you can imagine the airline example, if they weren't allowed to charge more for business class or for more legroom, for example, there wouldn't be any of those. But the price that everybody pays would be higher, much higher, because business class customers really subsidize those economy class customers. So, and then those business customers wouldn't be getting what they're willing to pay for.
So a flip side of this is actually, when we're talking about pricing, there isn't the ability to, let's say, offer a basic service at a cheaper price, as opposed to someone who has, absolutely gaming, for instance, which needs, high latency, high throughput. They might be willing to pay more. But that's not possible.
It's certainly very difficult under the current rules. Certainly unless it's a whole category of service and unless you jump through various hoops to do so. When we kind of look at the kind of innovation that we've seen from other countries, as part of like the Glomo Awards, for example, at MWC, they were almost exclusively from Asian countries, where net neutrality rules are much more relaxed. And they were able to prioritize named specific apps, or put a bundle of specific apps that they could sell to customers as prioritized over the network. They were able to do things like have AI-enabled prioritization of traffic on their network, which of course is a really good innovation for operators in all kinds of ways. And there were some that were able to prioritize things like even health data. So for example, if you had kind of, the NHS was doing remote monitoring of people's medical state, their pulse or whatever, potentially consumers of high medical risk, there wouldn't, under the current rules, be a way of prioritizing that. Well, certainly not without a lot of difficulty. And so we are missing out on innovation that we're seeing elsewhere.
Well, I think you said in your report, it struck me, it said it was notable that a large proportion of the candidates for those Glomar Awards for Best Consumer Service this year would not be compatible or would run the risk of being not compatible in the UK. So you've got innovative services that are being put in practice, people using and people paying for, that would not be possible here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that the UK is missing out for that reason. Not just the operators, the consumers are missing out for it. Because in the analogy that we have for business and economy class in the airlines, those business class customers are missing out on the comfort that they're willing to pay for. And then the economy class customers are having to pay a higher price because they're not being subsidized. So it really is in the best interest of not just the operators, but also the consumers.
And I think, so it's fair to Ofcom and the regulator. They did look at the rules and they provided additional guidance. But it seems to be that the issue now is clarity and ambiguity, or the opposite of the two. But it's not clarity; it's more ambiguity that is adding to that sort of unwillingness to maybe try new things, or equally going back to that investment point. If an investor can't be clear that what's going to happen, again, it risks that investment, because investment is based on risk, and this adds risk into that.
Yeah, absolutely. And when you're looking at kind of developing new products as a UK mobile operator, they've got very limited budgets for these kind of things, and they're not going to want to invest in something that they think the regulator is going to say no to. And in fact, the other issue is kind of because of certain rules regarding they need these products need to be improved by the superior service that the operators provide. If then the basic internet improves over time so that this priority service that they're giving them doesn't really improve them, then they would need to withdraw them. And that then becomes another issue. I mean, we think that really a much more permissive approach could be taken, whereby they are allowed to offer these services if there is demand for them, because we think that market forces are a great determinant of what there really is demand for. If technology companies are prepared to pay for the superior service, or if consumers are prepared to pay for it, then there probably is demand for it. There probably is beneficial. And that we think that there should only be intervention where a specific harm is identified. And that wouldn't be that difficult to do. Whereas now, I think the net neutrality rules, they're very defensive, they're very conservative, because they prohibit behaviors where there could be any risk of any detriment and I think we need to move on from that.
So it feels almost the wrong way round. Rather than allowing people to try and innovate, it's sort of off, saying, well, no, I need to know what you're going to do and how you're going to do it, but you don't really know what it's going to do. So that opportunity to try is almost taken out.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can imagine kind of when the iPhone was launched, imagine if Apple needed to go to the regulator every time it wanted to launch an app. And it had to identify what app idea they had, get the approval for the regulator for that app, and then they could launch it. Instead, of course, they kind of opened the App Store to all comers. And they say, okay, it's there. We've got this phone that can do this. You kind of give us your ideas and we'll put you on the App Store. And that led to a huge flurry of innovation. And that's what we're missing out on.
Right, so that sort of opportunity to see the next killer thing in the UK, we can't be part of that party. Now, your report looks at other areas as well, and one it looked at is sort of annual license fees, or what some might call a tax that the industry pays. And it was a startling figure that we brought out. If you look at the capital expenditure in investment that the UK industry has done, it's around 100 billion, but 40 billion of that's been in licenses and annual license fees. That's a big chunk of what could be spent in deploying and developing those networks. Yeah,
it's a huge cash drain on the operators, either in the form of spectrum auction, big lump sums, or the annual license fees that happen when those licenses expire. It's the equivalent now on the spectrum that the operators have. It's £500 million. Pounds a year. for the industry, which is a huge amount of money. And if they didn't have to pay that, that would allow them to invest 20% more every year in their network quality. And we're suggesting that this should be looked at partly because all of the major European countries are taking another look at whether they should be charging these annual license fees. And in many instances, what they are doing is they are negotiating with the operators and saying, okay, we could potentially not charge you these annual license fees. And instead, you will sign up to investing in maybe better coverage of these travel corridors, or you'll invest in in better rural coverage in these kind of areas. So it's not, we're not suggesting it as kind of a way to help the finances of the mobile operators, but it's actually a means of the government getting the kind of networks that they want. Because the current system of just trying to lean on the operators to do so, to invest in kind of the way they want to, the networks that they want, is not really working because of the cash constraints that the operators are increasingly facing.
So potentially, if there are areas where the government feels there's either market failure or there's social need to invest in, let's say sort of things at the moment on the highlight horizon, power resilience or rural coverage, there's money there that the government, that the industry already pays to government. If it invests in those areas, it could retain that money to do those schemes.
Yeah, or you could have a system where they give it to the government and then the government decides how to dole it out for those kind of network improvements. It's where there's kind of not a commercial need or incentive for the operators to invest in that way, but the government, because it has lots of other objectives, really wants that to happen. Then it's really up to the government to provide the funding for that. And perhaps a more palatable way of doing it is through relief on annual license fees.
And I think, that figure you mentioned, 20% increase in capital expenditures potentially through that. I mean, that's a significant amount of money to be put back into the system.
Yeah, it would make a huge difference, and especially if it was year after year after year. It's £500 million, and I, you would have thought that would be quite welcome by the government. £500 million investment in infrastructure. There has kind of like economic benefits even beyond that £500 million as well.
And as you said, this isn't something that is being considered alone in the UK. This is being done in other countries, and I think you mentioned France particularly already taking this action.
Yeah, Germany as well. Spain is kind of doing some other things. It's all of the major European countries have now for some time been taking a much closer look at whether that is the right approach to take.
And there was one other in your report that you looked at was sort of sharing spectrum, and I thought if we could touch on that.
Yeah, so in very rural areas, there is potentially more to be gained by the operators doing a greater degree of sharing than they're currently doing in those rural areas. In many instances, they share already the towers of the and that kind of is a significant cost saving. But they have often separate equipment and certainly separate antennas for to deal with kind of the rural spectrum that they have. So it would be a real cost-saving measure in terms of sharing equipment and then maintenance of equipment as well. But also it allows for a lot more efficiency in terms of not having the spectrum as fragmented as it is now. And that really improves its efficiency. And that kind of, especially in the lower band spectrum, that's really important for getting a lot of reach, propagation of the spectrum in rural areas.
Brilliant. And I suppose the question I'd sort of like to finish on is with the needs that the UK has and the options that you've looked at in this study. I mean, do you think the government will continue to prioritise short-term political wins, or do you think it can follow through some of the suggestions it's made as part of the mobile market review?
Well, I think that the mobile market review is an indication that there is some recognition by the government that the industry is not on the trajectory to deliver what the government wants from its infrastructure. And it is somewhat acknowledging that something needs to change if it is to get what it wants. And I do think it's very important for them to acknowledge that there is a trade-off here with the kind of low prices that they're insisting on, and the kind of quality that they're looking for. I think it's important also to recognise that the trajectory that the industry is on is just kind of like financially downwards, revenue lines, at least in real terms, and certainly cash flow, that the ambitions of the government are getting further away the longer we stay on this trajectory. And I would guess that the importance of network quality is actually going to go up as well, the further we progress from here as well. So I think it is the sooner the better that these interventions are implemented, and I think it's really good that the government are kind of looking at what they can do to bring kind of the reality of the operators and the demands of the government closer together.
So wow, that was a really thought-inspiring episode, and brilliant for our first inaugural session of Policy Unplugged. For everyone, please do remember Karen's report, UK Mobile Escape the Value Trap, is now available. It's available on Anders Analysis website. Mobile UK is also submitting its submission to the Mobile Market Review, and that will be downloadable on our website too. Anyone, please do, if you found that interesting, make sure you subscribe to the podcast and click that notification icon as well so you know what's coming up. And we look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you.